And a good number of babies that all hatched. Now, I'm technically jumping ahead a little bit because that first year, we actually reintroduced the tadpoles that hatched up into some of the streams. There was one site that we had permits to reintroduce frogs into, and so we did reintroduce some tadpoles into the streams up there. The following years, there was even greater success with breeding, lots and lots of babies, and so we've been able to reintroduce hundreds of little baby frogs now into those streams up in areas like Idlewild and some of those other mountain areas up in and around Los Angeles. And so, again, it was kind of like a simple solution, but it was obviously different than nature. We had to figure out, how do you simulate what they're experiencing out in the wild? How do we do that in a way that's going to be successful, that's going to work for these frogs? And the wine coolers were particularly good because you can still see in them even when it's all closed and they're nice and cold. And so that was actually really useful also. Instead of just sticking them into a fridge or a freezer, we could actually still see what was going on in there. That was part of why that particular solution was useful. So they're still, unfortunately, in some trouble with all of those reintroductions, and then there was a discovery of a ninth population that is still around of mountain yellow-legged frogs. There's still issues that they're facing, and many of those probably won't ever be eliminated. They probably will remain restricted to some of those farther up in altitude areas, but we are finding some areas where we can eliminate trout, eliminate some of the other non-native predators, and they are surviving better, especially when we're reintroducing the larger frogs as opposed to just tadpoles. Yeah.
Is there any plans to reintroduce them in San Diego?
I'm not sure. Not that I have heard. Again, just because of the fact that they're not the actual tadpoles or frogs from here. That, I think, is the biggest concern, would be moving them to a different location. But I don't know. I'm not sure where we're at. I know we do have now 2 different populations represented up there with our breeding program, but I think they're still kind of staying up in LA. So I doubt, unfortunately, that we'll ever get them back in San Diego County. Yeah.
So you mentioned a disease issue. Is that the fungus?
Yeah, so chytrid fungus, which we'll jump into as well, is maybe a part of the problem. We're not totally sure. The mountain yellow-legged frog numbers really started crashing in the 60s and 70s, and then they've continued to fall more slowly, but that was when it was first kind of noticed, like with the San Diego population, for example, that they were disappearing. Now, how many of you are familiar with chytrid fungus when I say that? How many of you are like, I don't know, do I have it on my feet? No. Chytrid fungus is a weird fungus that only affects amphibians. Normally, chytrid fungus, like, it would be stuff that breaks down wood material. But there's this one variety that has a weird ability to keratinize the skin of an amphibian. So that means that basically the fungus gets into the pores in an amphibian skin that allow it to breathe through its skin, that allow it to absorb moisture, and they basically harden those pores and cause the frog to stiffen up. They don't allow it to pass oxygen and water through their skin, and in a matter of a few days in most cases it will cause the amphibian to die. The reason I put a picture of this particular species, obviously this is not from San Diego. If you haven't seen one around, good, because they don't live here. But they actually don't live anywhere right now. They only live in zoos. It's a species called the Panamanian golden frog, and they are a species considered extinct in the wild. They were very heavily hit by chytrid fungus. It's still a weird thing. We don't quite understand it. What we do know, we do know that a lot of people think they know what's going on, but no one has really come to a conclusion that seems to make everybody agree. I'll back up there for a second. I mentioned that the mountain yellow-legged frog population started to decrease back in the 60s and 70s. It also coincided with the introduction of the African clawed frog, which was brought here to the United States and various parts of the world because back then, like in the 50s, it was used as a pregnancy test. which I'm sure sounds really weird. So medical labs would use these frogs, and they would inject a sample of a woman's urine into the back of the frog, and if they had the right hormones, meaning they were pregnant, that female frog would immediately start to lay eggs. So it was this really weird pregnancy test that was very effective. And then somebody came up with the pea on a stick test, and there went the clod frogs, because they didn't need them anymore, and they literally tossed them out the window, and in many cases, here in San Diego County, they did just fine. They are from South Africa, they live in a habitat similar to ours, and so they established pretty quickly. At the time, nobody really thought twice about it, and what we're finding now is that based on samples of clod frogs that were collected back then, that are now in our San Diego Natural History Museum collection, they have tested those frogs and have found that they appear to be a species that can carry chytrid fungus, but not be killed by it. Now, part of the question is, where did it all begin? We don't know, but this frog may be a culprit. It's possible that it used to exist in a variety of places, and that the clod frog is one that had adapted to deal with it, and then they brought it here, and then it brought chytrid, and that could be an impact on the mountain yellow-legged frog. The reason it seems to be a decent theory is that you can almost map the spread of chytrid fungus from Southern California through Central America, down into South America over the last 30 to 40 years. And it was in the 80s that in Central America, the Panamanian golden frog, the golden toad, if you've ever seen one of pictures of those before, was a species that within 2 years went from hundreds of frogs to one. And at the time, nobody knew what happened. There was a scientist studying it, and they had gone there, they got this grant to go study this weird golden toad. And while she was there, it was 1 year was great, the next year there was one, the next year there was one, and the next year there was zero. And what happened? And then there were other scientists seeing some of the same trends. Now, do we know if it was the clod frog that brought this? No, it's possible that it has existed in various places and that climate change has brought it into its fullest ability based on its preferred temperatures. We don't know the answer. We do know that right now the San Diego Zoo is the place for chytrid expertise, which is a pretty cool thing. We have a scientist, one of our pathologists, who is one of the world experts on chytrid fungus. He's developed some great tests. So we actually test samples from almost all AZA facilities, American Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So countrywide, we test for free samples from other zoos to make sure that their collections are chytrid free. There are now ways to treat it within a managed care setting. So if we find a frog that has chytrid, we can deal with it. You can't really spray a fungicide on the rainforest because it kills all the good stuff with the one bad one. But there are ways that we're trying to solve that side of the problem as well. And that was with the development of a mobile testing lab. So the way you test for chytrid fungus is through a PCR analysis, which is like basically kind of DNA testing to figure out if this thing exists there. And normally, like especially 10 years ago, that could only be done in like a really fancy lab. They've been able to develop a mobile testing unit that they can take to the rainforest of Madagascar and figure out on the spot, does this frog that I'm holding in my hand have chytrid fungus? And that changes the ballgame, because instead of having to take samples back and 3 months later find out if that frog had chytrid fungus, who is certainly now dead and probably passed it on to his buddy, now we can tell right then and there that this frog is dealing with that, and we can start to game plan. So that hopefully will make a difference. We don't know what the real solution is going to be. Can we cure it? Can we just deal with it? Can we hope that some species will develop ability, or that some of these frogs may already have some of that ability of the African clod frog to deal with it to a certain degree, and that some species may get decimated but still have a few that make it, right? We don't know what the answer is going to be yet, but the Panamanian golden frog that I showed you is one species that we are trying to rescue right now. We're one of the few facilities that are breeding them, The question is, what do we do? How do we send them back to the wild? Can we do it with chytrid still there? Do we have to wait till that goes away? Will it ever go away? So that becomes the question now, and we have to figure out what the next solution is to that question. Questions about this? The last thing I just kind of want to wrap up with, the next 100 years, hopefully there will be more than 100 years of the zoo. Maybe I'm biased, but really what we're seeing is redefining our own organization from within as one that is primarily focused on conservation. And that is a really cool thing to see. Our goal as an organization is to lead the fight to end extinction. And that is, in all of these cases, what we're really trying to do. The condor taking it from 22 to 430 was a great example of that, and we're trying to do that with more animals. We've reintroduced 30 different species into the wild already, and we're trying to build that as well. And trying to partner to continue to solve difficult problems. And then there's one other thing I want to mention. It's called our San Diego Zoo Global Wildlife Conservancy. We're all pretty lucky because we're local. We can go to the zoo and we can see it whenever we want to. And you can learn about what we're doing for conservation there at the zoo. But there's a website called endextinction.org, which is really trying to connect people with what we're doing globally, because we have 140 projects going on that most people know nothing about. This is just a small sample of what we've been up to. And so if you're interested in learning more about it, I would encourage you to check out endextinction.org. It's pretty easy to remember, and it talks about what we're really trying to do globally. So that's what I got. Questions?
That was great.
As I said, I am a herpetologist by trade, and I'm a big fan of all of our local reptiles and amphibians. So if you have any questions about that as well, I would love to answer them. Yeah, that's what we got. So if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise,
I have a question,
yeah,
which probably doesn't have an answer, but
we'll try.
I'm going to be teaching a course on sustainability next fall. So I'm really thinking about sort of like all this big picture stuff. And so as you talk about removing invasive species, I mean, I can just see us like removing invasive species forever and try to control things. What I'm wondering is if there's any examples, even small islands or anything, where we've really restored it such that it doesn't need maintenance anymore.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not something that we've done a lot of, invasive species removal, so I don't know that I'm super qualified to talk about it. But the Monterey Island that I talked about as an example, at this point, it is, like I said, free of rats and goats and cats. There is still a ranger that's there that monitors any boats that arrive. They do biosecurity monitoring. There's not a lot of big boats that are coming there. It's usually tourists there for snorkeling. So it's limited monitoring. Yeah, the question of can we ever just get to the point where now it's good, we can move on to the next thing. That's like the $1 million question in conservation right now, unfortunately, is how do we finish it and move on and not just get ourselves caught in something that will continue for the next 50 years. In some cases, that's the reality. It's going to take a long time. Condors, we're going to keep doing conservation with condors for a while, but can we ever get to the point where it's just done? I don't know that that is quite possible. I think in small cases, yeah, I think we can do it. I think part of the equation is how far is it from people? To be honest, I mean that's it's part of the equation. How often are people going there? And because what's the mechanism for invasive species spreading? It's usually us. Not always, but it's usually us. And so I think it's difficult, but it's possible. Yeah. Is that vague enough?
Well, no, I mean,
feel like
it
a
is.
politician.
No, it's totally vague, but that's
Yeah.
just kind of what I was wondering how the conversation was going among you guys on that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's still a question that has not been adequately answered yet. And part of it's because there's still not enough examples to look at, There are very few examples of invasive species removal that is complete, right? Where you've actually gotten all of them, to then see, like 5 years down the road, is it still the way that we left it, you know? And so there are a couple other islands in Fiji right now that are candidates for a similar kind of process to remove specifically rats and cats are the two big ones. And can we do it, and can we do it completely? And as a result, is it going to continue? Or is somebody going to come the next year and bring a couple rats and, oh, they're winning our $3 million, right? Yeah.
Habitat reduction, is that one of the biggest problems too?
Yeah, just removal of suitable habitat. I guess in the case of a lot of the smaller reptiles and amphibians, they're lucky because they don't usually need a huge home range. Like the Fijian iguanas, for example, like you can find them in the same tree like 2 years later. They don't have very much of a home range. But it is going to reduce their overall population size as a result of limited habitat. So I would say it has an impact on every species. Even if it doesn't cause them to disappear necessarily, it's certainly going to reduce their numbers, yeah. And I would say in all of these cases, habitat reduction has been certainly a factor, if not the major factor in their decline. Yeah.
I have a question about our local horned lizards.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a pretty avid hiker around San Elijo for the last 5 years and have never seen them out in the wild. And this year I've seen, I think 8. I just saw a little baby one this morning, so
Okay.
exciting. So, you know, obviously in my mind it seems like their population is getting better. Do you have any actual numbers on them?
I don't really have specific numbers. I will say I've heard from more people, because we live out in like Santee area, so I know a lot of people who go out to Mission Trails and hike there. I feel like I'm hearing more people say that they've seen them. I think part of it depends on when you're going too, because they're most active during like early summer, like late spring, early summer. So you know, we wouldn't ever expect to see them in like August or beyond until you get back to like April. So that's part of it, is just when you're looking. But it seems like in good habitat, they're doing all right. That's the biggest factor for them right now, is whether they have good habitat or not. You know, if they can live relatively close to development, as long as there's a good habitat to live in. Like I've seen some out in Santee where we live, just you know, half a mile from development, but that's because they're in good habitat. So I think that's a huge factor.
And so when you say good habitat, I've heard that the Argentine ants is a big reason why their numbers have declined. So is that included in good habitat, that they're maybe the native ants are doing better as well?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, again, I couldn't say with numbers for sure, but as long as there are harvester ants around, then that would pretty much constitute good habitat for them. A little loose soil and some harvester ants, and they're probably going to be okay. Again, they're another good example of they don't need a big area. They're not going to use a big home range. We had one of our keepers who was doing his master's project on studying the movements of horned lizards, and they don't move very far. They don't have a big space, but they'll stay in their spot. So yeah, and that could be part of it as well. Like when habitat gets disrupted, that's probably going to cause bigger issues, and then maybe they'll find a spot where now they can settle, and after a couple of years they're going to build that population a little bit. So that could be some of what we're seeing, is maybe some recovery post-development in some different places. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Really quickly, the next TECC Talk is September 15th, and the topic is the values of the great outdoors.
So none in August?
No, not in August. They're every other month.
Okay.